In this workshop, we're going to make this rather cute little mug cozy, as you can see here. And it's an introduction for you to the technique of Fair Isle, where you have 2 colours on each row, you can see there. So I'm going to show you 2 ways of doing it. I've cast on the number of stitches that are in the pattern. This is a free pattern on the Lovecrafts website. And I've now come to the 3rd row, so I'm ready to join in the next colour. So on the chart, it says for me to knit 2 stitches. Just untangle my yarn. So I'm knitting 2 stitches. And now I'm ready to bring the second colour in. Now, if you're a beginner, what I always say is just to knot the second colour on. So I'm just going to do a simple knot there, because that will give you the tension that you need as you start off. But when you come back to sewing in your ends, then you can undo the knot and make it look nice and neat. So I'm just going to slide that up so it's in the right position. There you go, see? So the first way I'm going to show you is using the English technique of knitting, where you've got both of your yarns in your right hand. And what puts a lot of people off Fair Isle is the fact that the yarns get really, really tangled. So I'm going to show you how to avoid that tangle. Now, because we want the dark green to really stand out, that's the yarn that's going to be going along the bottom of the 2 strands, and we'll always take the cream from the top. So let me show you how that looks. The chart says to knit 1 in the green. There we go, knit 1. And then I'm taking the cream from the top over the green, and I'm knitting 3. 1, 2, 3. Then I'm putting that yarn to one side, and I'm taking the green from the bottom. You see that loops from the bottom? Yeah. Knitting 1. I'm using a circular needle today because it's easier for me to demonstrate, but you just use your normal needles. And now the cream is going over the top, and I'm knitting 1, 2, 3. And this way they don't get tangled. If you're worried about your floats, which is the float of colour along the back, just make sure you don't pull it too tight. Sometimes what I do is use this finger to just give me a guide of how big the float needs to be and to stop me pulling that next stitch too tight. There we go. And again, over the top. 1, 2, 3. That stays at the top. The green comes from below. Knit 1. And on we go. Pick the green from below. Don't pull the strand too tight. See, isn't that easy? Now, I'm actually a continental knitter, so I usually hold the yarn in my left hand. So what I'd like to show you now is something we call two-handed Fair Isle knitting. So I'm now going to take the green into my left hand. So I've done my 3 stitches there. I'm going to do my 1 stitch, and the dominant colour, the pattern colour, you want it to be in your left hand in this case. And now I'm going to knit 1, 2, 3 with the yarn held in my right hand. Knit 1 with that hand. 1, oops, 2, 3. You can see all the nice neat floats, and my yarn isn't twisted. I've still got 1 ball over here and 1 ball on the other side. So I'm going to knit 1 there. 1, 2, 3. Just a little tug to make sure that's not too loose. Knit 1 of those. If you do want to try continental knitting, it's probably a good idea just to do a little garter stitch square just to get yourself used to the knit stitch, or a stocking stitch square if you're going to use the purl as well. I'm going to go back to the first way I showed you now, where I'm picking up the green from below the cream to knit 1 and then knitting 1, 2, 3. Now we've finished this row, we're coming to the purl row. So again, I'll show you both techniques. Get that strand out of the way. So again, my first 2 stitches are in the cream. Just get the green out of the way. And now we want this to stay above, so I'm just going to let that sit there. And I've got to purl 2 green stitches. And leave that there. Pick up the cream and knit 1. Just make sure on the purl row you've got enough tension. That's always my problem, is making sure the tension's right on this row. Obviously it is going to take a little bit longer than just knitting stocking stitch or garter stitch or something like that, but I'm sure you'll agree the effects are just gorgeous when you see those amazing Fair Isle jackets and hats and all sorts of beautiful projects. So now we come to the purl row, which is a little bit trickier, I always think. And again, I'm going to show you the 2 different ways of doing it. Get my yarns in order. So the pattern says to purl 2. And now I'm going to leave that yarn there, bring my green yarn round, and I'm going to purl 2. 1, 2. There we go. Now I want to leave that down. I'm just going to tighten this up a little bit. Now I'm going to purl 1 in the cream, leave that at the top. Purl 1. You have to watch your tension a little bit on the purl row, I always find. I'm just going to add a little bit more tension to that. 2, 3, drop it down, pick up the cream and purl 1 in the cream. What is good on the purl row is you can see your floats, you can make sure they're not getting too tight. Obviously it's a lot slower than just a normal stocking stitch or garter stitch, but it's well worth it because of the results you get being able to knit wonderful Fair Isle garments and accessories. We're nearly at the end of the row. So you can't really see much of the pattern there, but if I turn it around, you can see we're starting to get the beginning of the cross on the bottom of your chart. So look at that, you've just completed 2 rows of Fair Isle. So just keep following the chart until you get to the end. We're now on the central pattern, and I wanted to show you about floating over 5 stitches, because up until now we've only floated for 3. and now we're going to float over 5. So you can see there's the float there. So I'm now about to knit 1 green stitch. So I'm not pulling it too tight like that. I've got my stitches nice and spread out to give me a guide as to how big my float needs to be. Again, I'm going to knit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Taking the yarn from below, stitches are nice and spread out. So I'm going into the stitch, I'm not pulling the yarn too tight, and I'm holding there whilst I knit the stitch to make sure that my floats aren't too tight. You can float, some people float up to 9 stitches. 5 to 7 is about my limit. If it's on gloves and socks, 5 would be the limit because you don't want to catch your toes or fingers in them. So here we are with the finished mug cozy. Doesn't that look pretty? I've just given this a little light blocking because the ends were curling a little bit. And now it's time to pick up the button band. So you can see there's a column of stitches along here, and we're going to just pick up just by them in the holes. So I'm going to do it in the dark green. And first of all, I'm going to find the edge stitch, and I'm going to pull a loop of yarn through like that. Now, some people, when I've taught workshops, they've tried to pick up the bar in between stitches, but that really puts the fabric under a lot of pressure, so I prefer to go into the hole. So I'm going to go in this channel of holes here, and I'm going to pick up 3 stitches and then miss one. Oh, it doesn't want to be picked up. There we go. 1, 2. So I'm literally just poking my needle through the back of the fabric, wrapping the yarn round and coming back through. So ignoring the first stitch, I've now picked up 3, so I'm going to miss that gap there. See that? I'm missing that. And then I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. Then I'm going to miss that stitch and go 1, 2, 3. It's a bit like picking up stitches, I guess, when you're doing crocheting along a chain, something like that. If you prefer to hold your hand in this your yarn in this hand, in your right hand, then it's almost as if you're knitting a stitch through the fabric. 2, and I've come to the end now, so I'm just going to pick up the border stitch there. There we go. There we are. So we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 21 stitches for our border. So now I'm going to work this border in moss stitch. I'm doing this on a DPN just because it's not a big area and it makes it a little easier to demonstrate. So moss stitch, we do a knit one, and then we do a purl one, knit one, purl one, knit one, all the way along the row. And we'll end on a knit one just as we started. Then back the other way, again we start with a knit. And you'll work in total 6 rows of the moss stitch. Once you've knitted 6 rows, then you cast off, and you'll do exactly the same on the other side. Hey look, we've finished our mug cozy. Now all we've got to do is make a buttonhole loop. So I'm threading, I've decided to do mine in this lovely buttermilk colour. And I'm going to find where the centre, see the centre point is along here. So I want my buttonhole loop to start just to one side. And then you measure the size of your button, and that'll give you an indication of how big your loop needs to be. So I'm just going in alongside, and I like to just, here we go. I'm just going to put my finger in as an indicator of the size that I want. And then I'm going to go round again. There we go. So I've got 2 loops. Just adjust them slightly. First one's a bit big. There we go. Can you see that? So now I'm coming up again into the same point, and now I'm going to do blanket stitch. So I just turn it that way. You may remember blanket stitch from your school days. There we go. So that's the first one done. And then as you go, you can just ease them along, just to make sure it's a nice firm buttonhole. You can see I've just done that. I think we can just squeeze one more in there. Then you go back through the fabric, and then you can tidy your ends. If you're worried about the contrast colour standing out against the border, then you can always do it in the dark green colour. I've just done it in the paler colour so that you can see what this buttonhole looks like.